All right, what is up, everybody? Adrian M. Gibson here, and welcome to day 2 of TBRCon 2023. And we're starting off with another author reading. And today I'm joined by Mike Carey. How are you, Mike?
I'm very well, thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. So just to kick things off, I'm curious. You came from writing your last trilogy, which was the Book of Koli, the Trials of Koli, the Fall of Koli, the Rampart Trilogy. How are you feeling about transitioning from that trilogy into a new one, and this one being much more, I would say, sci-fi as opposed to more post-apocalyptic?
Yeah, no, it's definitely flexing a different set of muscles. I've really enjoyed it actually. It's a much bigger, more sprawling, more complicated story. I mean, Koli's story was sort of linear in a way. It was kind of a journey across a post-apocalyptic England in search of long-lost London. And this, by contrast, has a cast of thousands, and it has a lot of plot lines. It has settings on many, many different worlds. It covers an enormous span of time. So it's a different kind of story. I guess I was going for a more epic feel, but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it.
Right on. And for everyone who's watching, this book is Infinity Gate, which is out in the end of March 28th. I'm curious, why the multiverse? Why was that something that you were curious to play around with?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a good answer for it. I started doodling one day. I was. This is not how I normally go about sort of making up stories. I started doodling and drawing a kind of map of the multiverse. I guess I was thinking, if you have a situation where you have an infinite number of worlds that are like infinitely close together, they're just separated by like membranes of possibility. How do you sort of map that? How do you represent that pictorially? I ended up with this this diagram of a kind of spiral space with a lot of points that are outside of it. So the spirals represent sort of probability strands, and there are potentially an infinite number of them, and you can plot worlds depending on how far out they are along any of these spirals. And then there were things that were outside the spirals, which I called the scour, the sidereal, the mother mass, and the inchoate, and I had no idea what they were originally. I just thought that's kind of cool, and then I sort of fill in the detail, and I ended up with this story about about 3 characters really, whose sort of intertwined fates kind of in the end determine the fate of the multiverse, the fate of all of these many different Earths. Publishers Weekly, who just reviewed it, called it a space opera that never goes into space, because it has a lot of radically different worlds, some of them with organic life, some of them with machine life, but they're all Earth. There's a vast empire called the Pandemonium, which is an empire of different Earths, and then there is this other grouping called the Insurrection, or the Machine Hegemony, which is worlds that have only ever been populated by machines, and nobody knows who built them or where they came from.
That does sound like the kind of epic scale you find in space opera and that kind of thing, but just spread across them. It's like spread laterally as opposed to
yeah, very much
on grand scale.
I guess I'd read very shortly before this. I'd been reading Adrian Tchaikovsky, both the Children of Time, Children of Ruin books, and also Gates of Eden. That's sort of Doors of Eden.
Doors of Eden, yeah.
Which I absolutely loved, and it's a kind of similar space. I was already sort of working on it when I read Doors of Eden, and Doors of Eden does some of the same things and does them brilliantly, which is annoying.
It's like, damn you, Adrian. All right. Well, do you want to give a little bit of a synopsis of the book, just to give people a sense of, you've mentioned multiple POV characters and sort of some of the world building, but do you want to give a general synopsis?
Yes. So it starts with a scientist, a woman named Hadiz Tambuwal, who lives on our Earth. She's a Nigerian physicist working on a weird little campus just outside Lagos. The campus has been set up by a bunch of billionaires who are trying to avert climate breakdown, trying to save the world, basically, for their own selfish reasons. And Hadiz is looking at dark energy. She's trying to basically find a an infinite renewable energy source that doesn't have any kind of climatic downside, and she fails completely at that. But she does accidentally uncover a way of moving between dimensions called stepping. And it can only ever take you to the identical spot on another Earth. You can't move sideways. You can't move from the Lagos of one Earth to the London of another. Stepping sideways seems to be impossible. And so she starts to explore these other worlds, thinking that, you know, if we mess up our own Earth, we just find one where sentient life never evolved, and just bail out, just start again somewhere else. But unfortunately, she runs across the edge of this huge intergalactic empire, the Pandemonium, which is an alliance somewhere between a kind of trade federation and an actual centrally governed empire. It's in theory, it's consensual. You're invited to join. You say yes or no. In practice, it's ruthlessly governed by a central council, and if you step out of line, then basically you don't exist anymore. And they don't like anybody apart from themselves using teleport technology, because that's the key to everything else. And Hades is just this one lone adventurer, and they very quickly realize that somebody is making unauthorized steps, and they go hunting for her. And at the same time, there's this war going on in the background. They've just discovered the machine civilization, and they're at war with the machines. They're not sure whether Hades might be a spy for the machines or whether she's just a free agent. But either way, they're determined to find her, shut her down. And that's the kind of the catalyst for everything that happens afterwards.
Excellent. Well, you told me you have two short readings prepared for this, so I'll let you get into your first one. This particular section, why did you decide to choose this one?
So I've chosen a couple of sections that introduce key characters. This one is about a character named Topaz Tourmaline Fivehills, who is a young woman, schoolgirl actually, living on one of the Pandemonium Earths. And this is a world where it wasn't apes, it wasn't anthropoids who won the sentience lottery. It was rabbits. So Paz is to rabbits as we are to apes. She's a sweet kid. She's very, very intelligent. She's very curious. She's very well-meaning, and she is going to topple an empire at some point. So this is Topaz Tourmaline at school with her anima, Tricity, which is an anima is a tiny little robot that sort of helps you out with your day-to-day tasks. Tricity is looks like a little monkey, a little ceramic monkey. So Topaz has gone to school, and this school day does not go as normally. The other character who's mentioned here, Dulcie, is one of Topaz's best friends. And Topaz is usually referred to as Paz, which is short for Topaz. The enforcement officers walked into the classroom just as Paz evoked a sleep command to Tricity. There were three of them, 2 women and 1 man, all tall and broad and scarily beautiful in their gold-buckled green uniforms. The man and one of the women were augmented, the metal implants in their forearms and on their faces plain to see. The other woman, the oldest of the 3, judging by her dark fur and the seniority bands on her shoulders, shook hands with Instructor Headland and no doubt spoke to him on a private channel. "Class," Instructor Headland said, "this is Vetch Pearlescence, Enforcer Captain of City District 8. I'm sure you'd all like to join in welcoming her." The students dutifully stood and murmured the required words in a ragged chorus. "Welcome to our classroom, Enforcer Captain Vetch." "Thank you, students," the captain said. "Please resume your seats." They all did. After a glance from the captain, Instructor Headland sat too, taking the chair from his podium into a corner of the room and settling himself there. "Now," the captain said, surveying the faces all tilted up to look at her, "you might be asking yourselves what you've done to deserve a visit from the police. Maybe you're wondering if anyone here in this classroom is on our watch list." She smiled, and Paz expected her to reassure them that this wasn't the case. Instead, she said, "Can any of you tell me what the insurrection is?" Paz's hand went up automatically, but so did almost everybody else's. Only Dulcie failed to respond. It was an easy question, after all. The Ansurrection War was one of the most popular topics in the class's current events strand. You, the captain said, pointing at one of the students. It was Gift Chrysoprase, inevitably. Gift always sat in the very center of the front row. It reflected her view of the universe's deep structure. The Ansurrection is a coalition of worlds like the Pandemonium, Gift recited. But there's no life there. There's just robots, and nobody knows who built them. Very good, the captain said, nodding approval. That's exactly what the Ansurrection is. But that's not how they would describe themselves. Why not? Anyone. A few hands withdrew themselves. The rest waved more strenuously. The captain pointed to a boy this time, Blackbird Coral. The robots think they are alive, Blackbird said. Yes, they do, the captain agreed emphatically. They're wrong, of course. They're only imitations of life. The best scientists in the world, in all the worlds, have looked into that question many, many times, and they've always come back with the same answer. A machine can't think for itself. It can only pretend. So it's wrong, really, even to say that they think they're alive. They only think they're alive. The captain smiled and raised her eyebrows as she said this. Laughter broke out across the room, breaking at least a little of the tension. Paz didn't laugh, though. That stuttering sentence resonated with her strangely. They think they're alive. Surely you could make the same point about that second think, because it wasn't real thinking any more than the first one was. They think. You'd never get to the bottom. You'd just go into layer after layer of the same mistake. Paz stole another glance at her friend. Dulcie wasn't laughing along either. She was looking more and more miserable about all this. Are you okay? Paz voked. But she got no response. With both arrays and animas offline, Dulcie wouldn't get that message unless she actively checked for it. And there's another thing that's easy to get wrong, the Enforcer captain went on. We say robots, and what do we imagine? I bet you're thinking about your animas or your parents' helpmeet, a machine that could sit on your shoulder or walk past you in the street. She leaned forward and down, bringing her face a lot closer to their level. Her expression was grave and urgent, as if she was telling them something that could save their lives. Put that thought out of your mind. The robots of the Ansurrection can look like anything they want to. Some of them are as big as buildings, as big as mountains even, mountains that walk. Some are so small they're like dust hanging in the air, and some are just minds that can flow from one body to another as quickly and easily as you would change your clothes. She straightened up again. And we now have reason to believe, she said, that some of them can look like us. The reaction to this was dramatic, a general gasp of shock, and then a babble of voices. Everyone looked at everyone else as if the creepiness of the captain's bald assertion had to be shared in order to be fully felt. But Dulcie didn't look at anyone. Oh yes, the captain said, nodding again. As you would imagine, they can make a synthetic body to any specification, and it will look exactly like the real thing. The mimicry is so perfect, they can even pass a medical examination. If you feel for a pulse, you'll find one. If you take a temperature, it will be in the normal range. But if you cut them open, you'll find pistons and servos, a chipset instead of a brain. And if you look in their eyes, there won't be anyone there. The captain's own eyes narrowed as she reached the point of her speech. They're like the monsters in the Telos drama, Fake Fur, that steal people's skins so they can wear them. There were more gasps and sighs at this and a few keening sounds from the more impressionable students. Instructor Headland grimaced, his whiskers quivering. That is very graphic, he said. Please, Captain, I don't see any reason to scare the students with... The police officer held up her hand to hush him. I imagine you have questions, she said to the class. Please feel free to ask them. What reason? Dulcie asked. The captain took a moment or two to determine where the question was coming from. Dulcie had spoken very softly. I'm sorry? Dulcie looked up at last. You said you have reason to believe the machines of the Ansurrection can imitate organic selves. How do you know? Vetch Pearlescence gave her a keen, appraising stare. That is an excellent question. As you know, a telepathic coil examination can tell a mechanical construct from an actual self. Even if it's only scanning surface thoughts, the patterns are entirely different. And since the atrocities on Saber, Shohal, and Nebirison, we have been doing random scans in public places. Routine analysis of these scans detected something extraordinary. There were patterns of thought, exact sequences that were repeated. We identified 17 of these thought strings, each of which recurred many times over. They were completely harmless thoughts with low levels of accompanying emotion, but clearly they were false. They were being erected somehow as a barrier to prevent the scanner from reading what was underneath. They were thought shields, presumably recorded from the thoughts of actual organic selves. This time there was only stunned silence in the room. That last revelation was still bedding in. Paz felt a lurch of sickness as she imagined and then tried not to imagine how thoughts could be peeled from the inside of someone's brain. Dulcie nodded. I see, she said calmly. Thank you. But the captain still wasn't done. The next step, she said, was to set up large-scale coil units in counterphase across the city at 2-mile intervals. If we succeeded in catching any of these mimic thought chains, these counterfeits, the point of intersection would give us an actual location. And we did. We did succeed. One of the points of intersection, you may be surprised to learn, was this classroom. A universal gasp went up, along with some actual cries of alarm. Paz managed not to cry out, but only by pressing her fist up against her lips. Instructor Headland's eyes went round and wide. I was not told about this, he blurted. No, the captain agreed coldly, you are not. You are no less under suspicion than anyone else in this room. Please take your seat. She held the instructor's gaze. After a moment, he went back to the dais and sank into his chair. Paz could see that he was shaking. The captain turned her back on him and addressed the class again. So, she said, with a bright, humorless smile, children, would you like to help me catch a spy?
Dude, that is amazing.
Thank you.
I love that little twist. That twist is brilliant. Brilliant. So this is giving me some serious Battlestar Galactica vibes.
Thank you. That is, I'll take it. I love that series. The
What's
revamp.
from your perspective? Obviously, this is just one aspect of Infinity Gate is the these artificial intelligences. So for you, why was this kind of a strand of the narrative that you wanted to follow through with and exploring things like, I imagine, like a hive mind, but also the ability for these robots and AI to take different shapes and the subterfuge that could ensue?
I guess this was an idea that I was already playing with. That there's an
Mhm.
AI. Actually, there are several different kinds of AI in the Koli trilogy. I think one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated is because we seem to have reached a kind of watershed moment in the development of artificial intelligence, in that we now have AIs that can reproduce creative work, AIs that can draw pictures or can reproduce pictures, AIs that can create music. So clearly, from my point of view, this is bad because one of them is going to take my job at some point. But it seems that with every year that passes, there are more and more of these milestones that we thought were purely the hallmarks
Yep.
of organic thought, sentient thought, and they're falling one by one. We're getting machines that can do these things, and although we're repeatedly told we're still a generation out from machines that can actually think, assuming that can ever happen, it seems to be accelerating. So it's and a lot of people believe that this is kind of like going to be the defining crisis for the human race, that we will design our own successors, and they will be better at being human than we are, and therefore they will replace us. I guess I don't subscribe to that sort of doomsday scenario, but I do think that there are fascinating and terrifying implications to us being responsible for creating other thinking beings. It's kind of it's one of the enduring preoccupations of sci-fi, and has been ever since Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So in a sense, I'm treading that old ground, but at a time when it sort of seems to be going from fiction to fact.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, and your second reading, what section did you choose, and why did you choose that?
So the second reading is going to be it's introducing another character, the third of the major characters apart from Hades and Paz. It's a guy named Asean Nakanika. He's a young man living in Nigeria, living in the Lagos city of his own world, which is not. It's slightly different from our world, but it's close enough that when Hades goes to ground, when she's trying to hide from the Pandemonium, she chooses a world that's very, very like her own, because she can pass for a native there. She can pass for an indigenous, for someone who belongs there. And she meets this guy, Asean, who has been brought up, has grown up in conditions of extreme poverty. Also belongs to an ethnic group that's kind of, in some ways, a disenfranchised and disrespected minority, Ibibia. And he's someone who's had to make really, really hard choices just to survive his whole life. And through meeting Hades, he gets sucked into the Pandemonium space as well, and is given a choice between death and being drafted. Death and becoming a soldier, and he chooses being a soldier. And this is basically the passage that describes what happens to him in the immediate aftermath of that choice.
Excellent. Well, Mike, take it away.
Okay. A life in the army begins with radical surgery. Not knowing this, Asean had no idea what to expect when he was taken from his cell to Mudugareti, a military hospital the size of a small city. The cello officers who took him there in a military transport with no windows and seemingly no driver were strangers. They didn't speak a single word to him in the course of the journey. At the hospital, Asean was given over to 4 orderlies. The orderlies looked somewhat like the cello officers, but with white armor in place of red. In fact, they weren't wearing any armor at all. The orderlies were animas, AI constructs slave to Mudugareti's intelligence system. The armor was a ceramic sheath over their metal bodies, kept antiseptically clean by a variety of chemical agents and periodic dousing with a spray of superheated steam. The orderlies took Essie into a shower room where they stripped off his clothes and washed him very thoroughly with astringent liquids that stung and stank. They shaved his head with blades they extruded from the tips of their fingers. They slathered his body with a clear liquid that thickened immediately to a gel. When they scraped the gel away, all of Asean's body hair went with it. He endured all this as stoically as he could, wondering the whole time if Moon Sustenti had lied to him. It seemed entirely possible that he was being prepared for execution. Instead, he was strapped to a gurney and wheeled into an operating theatre. The theatre was a circular room of about 20 meters diameter, its walls and floor as perfectly white and reflective as the orderlies' carapaces. The domed ceiling was probably white too, but Asean couldn't tell. An agonizingly bright light shone down from its zenith, eliminating all shadow in the room and hiding whatever was up there from his sight. The orderlies turned their backs and went away, closing the door behind them. Asean was alone in the room, which, because of the flensing light, the dome, the perfect silence and stillness, seemed to him like a place of worship. Not execution, then, he thought in his misery and terror, but maybe sacrifice? A sound welled up from everywhere and nowhere, a clear, perfect note. A slight vibration came along with it, communicated through the floor to Asean's gurney and from there to his body. The sound grew louder and the vibration stronger until his whole frame seemed to ring in harmony with it. Something descended from the ceiling. Asean had seen a Japanese spider crab once. Not the real thing, of course, but a picture in a book that Ndulu had shown him one night at Olososun. The book was part of the dump's unpredictable bounty, found in a sack of waterlogged and half-pulp newspapers. "Looks a bit like you," Ndulu had said, making fun of Asean's wide, slightly bulging eyes. Asean had laughed and come back with some suggestions as to which animals most closely resembled Ndulu himself. But the spider crab had shocked and disgusted him. It was like something vomited up out of a nightmare. The thing that was coming down from the ceiling towards him now was very much like the thing in that photograph, but encased in the same shining white ceramic as the orderlies. It had dozens of long, slender arms, segmented at far too many joints, unfolding like the stamens of a flower in a speeded-up film. At the end of each arm was an implement. Some bore sharp points or angled blades. Others flexed unnervingly long steel fingers or irised open to reveal nozzles, lenses, clusters of waving filaments. Asean arched his back and screamed for help as loud as he could. Nobody came. But since his yelling emptied his lungs, he inhaled the sedative anesthetic mix very quickly when the dosing arm was clamped over his mouth. His struggles weakened, his eyes slid shut, even as the busy, bustling appendages went about their business. For a long time after that, he was aware of nothing at all. While he slept, radical and irreversible changes were made to Asean's body. Holes were drilled in the long bones of his arms and legs, and into his pelvis, ribs, and shoulder blades. His bone marrow was extracted and mixed with an allotropic form of tungsten aluminide and programmable proteins. The newly mixed composite was then re-injected into the bones, and the holes sealed. Over time, the aluminide would seep into the bones themselves, giving them an incredible resistance to damage. His lungs and kidneys were removed and replaced with much more efficient bioartificial organs. His new kidneys were equipped to metabolize or denature more than 5,000 known toxins. Where necessary, they could synthesize and disperse antidotes and neutralizing agents within minutes of initial infection. His new lungs could seal themselves against non-breathable atmospheres while maintaining viable oxygen levels for prolonged periods through a novel use of synthetic chloroplasts and metabolic catalysts. He could even survive and function for minutes at a time in complete vacuum. The fatty deposits around his organs and in the dermal layers of his skin were injected with a plastic compound that greatly increased their compressive and yield strengths, in effect giving him built-in shock absorbers. Across the corneas of his eyes, thin sheets of the same plastic were sprayed in hundreds of micrometer-thick layers. In between the layers were intelligent filaments that could deform the lenses of the eyes to provide pin-sharp focus and up to 100 times magnification. The plastic was also self-cleaning and highly resistant to damage. To control all these new organs and structures, a genetically engineered parasite was introduced into Asean's brain. The parasite was an annelid worm, a modified form of Chitogaster anandali. About 1 million of the things made their nests in among the unconscious man's neurons, then died and dissolved. Irrigated with the dead worm's remains, the nests, woven from lipid-rich myelin, combined to form a secondary nervous system, seamlessly melding the smart engineered parts of Asean with the old haphazard core. When he woke, brought to full alertness at once by a cocktail of tweaked adrenaline and psychoactive chemicals, he discovered he was no longer at Madhugareti. He was at an induction facility on Bivouac 6, one of a whole cluster of worlds that were technically within the Pandemonium but owned entirely by the Cello. No civilian personnel ever set foot on Bivouac 6. The whole planet was an army camp. Actually, Asean was in the air above the facility, strapped to the side of a C-17 troop transport that was heading out to sea. He wasn't alone. Dozens more people were lying above, below, and to the sides of him, locked into identical harnesses, so that their freedom of movement was limited to turning their heads and twiddling their toes. Their bare toes, since all the men and women Asean could see were naked. Men and women was a broad term. They were all roughly human in terms of body plan. But like Watchmaster Vemet and Trooper Moon, they were surprising in other ways. Many were furred, a few scaly or feathered. Where Asean saw regular smooth skin like his own, there was a startling array of shades, including vivid red and orange and pale green. When it was 3 miles from shore and flying at a height of 500 meters, the harnesses opened. Asean hit the water at what is normally called terminal velocity. The impact was agonizingly painful, the force of it stunning and disorienting, but Asean found as he sank deeper and deeper below the surface that both the pain and the confusion passed off quickly. His enhanced skin and skeleton had absorbed the sickening blow with almost no actual damage. And his super-capable lungs, as he thrust and squirmed his way back up to the surface, synthesized oxygen from recycled lymphatic fluid to keep his body functioning at full efficiency. Though he wasn't able to draw in a breath for more than 2 minutes, he felt no discomfort at all. He swam back to shore, surrounded on all sides by other naked bodies. As he did so, he discovered he now had a new sense in addition to the regular 5. He was aware of his own position in relation to all the other recruits. He knew exactly how many were in front of him, how many coming on behind, along with all the distances and vectors. It was as though he had his own radar, perfect within its limited scope. A tall, imposing figure was waiting on the shore, dressed in red plate with 2 black bands across the chest. A sergeant. Next to him was what looked like an entire army in the same red livery, until Asean saw that the breastplates of all these other soldiers were open, and empty. They were suits of cello armor, waiting to be claimed. "You're all in uniform violation, recruits," the sergeant said. "Find your suit and seal in. Now."
Fantastic stuff. I like that you chose those two readings because it gives you obviously the different POVs, but it also gives you a different sense of like what this world entails. So from the aspect of world building, how was it for you to map out the complexities of the Pandemonium and this one character who's kind of like the eyes of the reader in the sense that they're experiencing so much of this stuff for the first time, but then other characters who are a little bit more embedded in different worlds?
Well, I discovered through writing Girl with All the Gifts, Boy on the Bridge, and the Koli books, I sort of discovered that one of the best ways of discovering a new world is through the innocent eye, through somebody who's come to it from the for the first time, and therefore sort of shares the same sense of strangeness that the reader does. And I've done that at many points here. You know, we see the Pandemonium first from the outside, but then through Paz, we see what it's like to be a citizen of it. It's a very odd story because it does have so many sort of different layers sort of laminated into it. And I did a lot of messing around with structure as I was writing it. I got about 2/3 of the way through and then completely changed the structure. We were going to start with
Oh,
Paz
wow.
initially, and now she doesn't come in until about 200 pages into the book. And there isn't a moment when all of those three main characters meet until the very end of the first book. It's kind of, I guess that's a tried and true formula as well, isn't it? That you introduce your team as separate entities. You tell the origin story of how they come to be a team, how they come to sort of to function together, to meet and to work together. It's like the first season of Heroes.
Yeah.
Which I loved. So yeah, it's useful to have an infinite canvas, but it's also dangerous because it's I guess it's quite easy to sort of just spill out into kind of rambling inconsequentiality. So I did a lot of thinking early on about which worlds we would see and at what point they'd be introduced. I guess ultimately there are maybe 6 or 7 Pandemonium worlds that are kind of central to the story. And then there's a couple of the Pandemonium calls worlds that they've never bothered with, the unvisited. So there are two unvisited Earths that are really important, and then there's A1, which is the sort of core world of the Insurrection. So quite a lot, but it is contained. Oh, and yes, we also get to meet something called the Mother Mass, which is a world that never did develop sentient life, except the world itself is sentient. The entire biosphere is sentient, which is what is a place that the Pandemonium discovered, tried to exploit and couldn't. The Mother Mass just basically kicked them all out again. And the Mother Mass has a power that no other being that we meet has. The Mother Mass can step people sideways, so she can take you, or it can take you from a given location on one world to a completely different location on another world, which is a much coveted trick.
Amazing. And so this is going to be a trilogy, correct?
No, just a duology. It's just Infinity Gate and its sequel, for which we don't currently have a title.
So this book, like you said, it's like you're assembling the team and everything, and then I imagine setting everything up for book 2, and book 2 is going to be madness.
Book 2 is, how do you stop a war between two galaxy-spanning civilizations when basically all you've got is a man, a woman, and a rabbit?
Amazing.
Or a man, a woman, a rabbit, and a robot.
I love it. All right, well, we will wrap things up there. That book again is Infinity Gate, and it is out on March 28th. Which formats will that be available in, Mike?
I think hardcover and audiobook and ebook, and probably the format paperback, large paperback.
Excellent. And where can people find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter. I hang around on Twitter, and I'm not much on Facebook anymore. I still have an account, but I don't use it very much. and I may not be using Twitter for very much longer, depending on where Twitter goes. Yeah, so just those really.
Awesome. And that's your Twitter handle is Michael Carey 191, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. And later today, you can catch Mike on a panel that I am moderating on the intersection of nature and technology, which I'm really looking forward to. And thank you again for doing this reading. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Cheers, Adrian.